like even when I first started, I used to kind of prep my questions. So I'd have like some kind of like bullet points, topics that I wanted to cover with a guest. And early on, I just ditched that format because it felt too forced. Like I was trying to force something that wasn't like just a natural progression of the conversation. So I ditched that early on and found that I just like to hop on, typically I'll schedule a 45 to 60 minute slot with the guest, and there's no prep work. We hop on and it's just like, hey, what do you love talking about? All right, we'll spend some time there and we'll see where it goes. And we just jump in and, have fun with it.
Okay, so moving on a little bit from the podcasting, I want to know a lot of your companies and even your podcast has the name Monster in it as your branding. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Like, can you give us a backstory?
Yeah, there's not really much of a story. I mean, when we started our first business, Monster Technology, and then kind of Monster VoIP was born out of a necessity of Monster Technology, so we just kind of stuck with that theme. And then the podcast was for the company, so we stuck with that. Monster Chats, I've kind of put on pause. We're thinking of bringing it back to life. I've just been really enjoying this, Sales Hustle podcast, interviewing salespeople and things like that. So there's no real reason for that, but it's bold and it stands out and it catches people's attention.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the reason initially, and then the theme has kind of stuck around for many different purposes.
So, how much do you think the name really matters to like the podcast and the branding? Because,
Mm.
like I started a podcast and everyone's like, "Oh, like I don't. I would start a podcast, but I need a name." I'm like, just go do it. Go and start a podcast. Think about the name later. What's your take on like naming and branding itself?
I mean, the naming and brand are important, but it's not as important as you think. Like a lot of people get hung up on not starting because they can't pick the name. And the thing is you can change the name. You can also change the theme. Like the great thing about podcast is they have seasons. So I like to say, you have a reason for the season, right? Maybe, season one, you're interviewing entrepreneurs and founders about scaling the business, and then maybe season two, you're interviewing some different sort of business leader. I mean, like you can kind of change the theme as long as it's still somewhat along the lines of what your listeners are going to enjoy and find value in. But you can also change the name, and that's totally not a problem. I've seen it done without any losing any listenership or anything like that. But the name, um it kind of depends on like what is your show about, and what is your strategy with the show. um I'm a fan of having your name in the show to kind of help elevate your own personal brand. And I think sometimes people make their show names too long, so really having the show name with not too many words is definitely better. And the branding is important too, because one of the easiest way to grow your audience is for your guests to share that content, and you want it to be something that they are comfortable or proud to share.
Okay, and so this next question is kind of linked to like naming and branding, but like when you're thinking of starting like a company,
Mm-hmm.
how much planning do you go into like your business model and like your branding and your naming, just for a company's standpoint?
Yeah. Um, it's definitely with a company. It's way more important with a
Yeah,
company than like a podcast name,
obviously.
because you don't want to be changing company names.
Yeah.
But what's more important than the name is like the mission and the vision and like the value proposition. So like really identifying what those are, and then that can typically help you come up with a name better, right? So part of what we do at Salescast, right, where we manage podcasts, is we transform the way that sales is done, um, through a podcast, hence the name Sales Cast, right? So, I think really figuring out like what problem do you solve? What is your mission? What is your vision? What sort of impact are you trying to make? What's your value proposition? If you can identify those things and kind of then work backwards, and it's a lot easier to then come up with like your company or your business name.
So I just thought of this like right now, but do you think podcasting is the new golfing?
I like that. I like that analogy.
Yeah, I might even title like again
I
for
mean,
anyone who got this far. I might title this episode that is podcasting the new golfing.
that my idea with podcasting is it's a way to build more of the right relationships with the right people to win your dream clients. And I think that is something that used to be done on the golf course, right? So I actually really love that analogy.
Yeah, so like when you're golfing, you're like you're talking about. I don't do much golfing, but it's usually like the older generations way of like doing business and getting your sales up.
Hmm.
So maybe podcasting because we're online, because we have technology, it could be the new golfing. So you heard it here.
Yeah.